devices, it deletes the default route, so it disables the network connectivity of the device, and then it actually takes, if there's any IP tables or firewall rules, it deletes the firewall rules and then adds firewall rules to reject any outbound traffic or any traffic being forwarded through the device. So it pretty much takes it off the network even after it's been rendered a lobotomy for removing all of or writing over all of the data on the disk. Mm-hmm. And then as a final step, it does a remove-RMF star of /. So it goes ahead and tries to delete any remaining files off of the storage. I'm not exactly sure how far it gets through this because the first couple of things are pretty destructive. I'm not sure if it makes it actually to the removal part, but that would be the most likely one to succeed first on most operating systems, since that command is pretty generic across Unixes. So, but yeah, it's pretty destructive.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like, it trashes their storage, their firewall rules, as you said, and stops the device entirely. For the victims of this attack, on the user end of things, would that just mean that the devices just completely stop and there's no way to get them started again? Or what does that mean from the consumers who are actually using these devices?
I think consumers would have to reflash their device, the firmware on it, which for most consumers this would be a lot more tedious than they're willing to do when it comes to a $30 wireless IP camera. They're more likely going to throw the camera out and buy another one. And just assume it just stopped working. And then for, that would be really the only way.
Wow, and you had mentioned in earlier reports this week that the number was at, I think you said 2,000 devices that were wiped due to the malware in the first few hours of discovery. Has the attack continued? Has that number gone up at all?
As far as I know, the number, I think, peaked at 4,000, and the command and control server was taken offline. And it looks like that pretty much stops the malware, as far as I can tell, in its tracks, as it first tries to reach out to the command and control server, and if it can't reach it, it just hangs. Because I actually ran the malware on one of my spare Raspberry Pis, and it hung when it was trying to reach the command and control server. What ended up happening was the botnet, or the person who wrote this, didn't expect all this attention and didn't like it, and made him nervous, so he decided to stop the malware from spreading, and decided that he wasn't gonna change it anymore. He wasn't gonna update it to do be any more destructive than it already had been. So
right.
He's planning on quitting, I think.
And we've seen something similar to this before, right, Larry? It's almost like BrickBot, which was, for our listeners, the malware that back in 2017 attempted to permanently destroy insecure IoT devices as well. Did you see any similarities or differences between those two strains of malware?
Yeah, it was the BrickBot malware, I think, was built as a Python script, I thought. This was actually contained different architectures or binaries of different architectures, but the intent and the commands were similar, so it was similar to BrickBot, but implemented in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I feel like kind of the motive behind both BrickBot and this malware clearly had that purpose to say, look how insecure IoT devices are. We need to destroy them so that they won't be, at least for BrickBot, so that these devices wouldn't be infected with Mirai. It's definitely an interesting motive for sure, and I'm sure there's a mixed bag of opinions out there in terms of either empathizing with this effort versus thinking that this is just malicious and not the right way to do things.
Right.
I'm curious too, I did see reports that pointed to a 14-year-old hacker who was behind this. Is that something that you were able to get any insight into, or were those more third-party reports? No,
he's 14, he's from Europe. And I talked to him over Twitter. He reached out to me over Twitter, over DM, and told me that he was planning on quitting because he didn't expect this was going to be a big deal. Mm-hmm. And he got nervous and just doesn't want to get in any trouble, so he decided he was going to stop. before things got worse. And then somebody had misattributed him to Iranian hackers, which really got him aggravated and scared because he's not Iranian and has had no motivation to do anything between Iran or the United States. It was just him trying to take down targets for other script kiddies who might be looking to build botnets, and he was just getting sick of it. So his sole motivation was to remove the vulnerable IoT devices that botnets are built on to stop other script kiddies from building botnets and, I guess, aggravating them with it. So the machine was hosted in Iran, the IP was, but we all know that IPs don't mean attribution because the internet is you can easily proxy through IP addresses in any country you want and pretend to come from any country you want. So IPs don't really mean anything. It's just interesting to know, where the IP was.
Right.
That's, his choice of server. So.
Well, I'm curious, taking a step back and looking at the IoT market in general, it's obviously insecure, and there's obviously big issues, stemming right down to that default password issue that is really at the heart of all this. I'm curious your thoughts on the IoT security market in general, and whether you think that more malware such as Silex, such as BrickBot, will be seen in the future.
I'm hoping not. I think the IoT manufacturers have made some strides to secure devices. Mm-hmm. I'm not 100% positive that they've completely cleaned up the security, but I know that some vendors have removed some vulnerable services on devices and have actually made devices upgradable where they push new firmware out. I actually have an IoT device in my lab that has been asking me to update its firmware for a year, but I don't want to because I want to keep it vulnerable for other testing. So I know that vendors are coming to terms with having to build secure devices that can be updated. I just don't know how many of them have actually gotten on board versus ones that are ignoring it. So I guess the future will tell. If there's still new devices being deployed and rampant botnet activity, we'll know that they haven't come full circle on their security standards.
Well, fingers crossed that, there's a little more awareness out there from the vendors and manufacturers part. And then, from the actual consumers themselves, is there any kind of best practices out there as well? In my opinion, it should be more on the vendors' shoulders, but do you think that consumers can really do anything?
Generally, if you're buying a device and you're buying it off of, some third-party site, what's the big Chinese one? Alibaba, is it? It's you're sort of taking a risk when you're putting that device on your network in regards to security. It's more likely you might get a better device from something that might be like a Ubiquity router would be a better choice than, say, a highway router from China. So that's my recommendation, is to stick to known vendors like Ubiquity that are known to try and take security seriously and patch their devices that they deploy.
Mm-hmm. Larry, thank you so much for coming on to the Threat Post podcast today and telling us a little bit about your discovery of Silex and